Gary Fletcher. I'm a board member of the Friends of Ecological Reserves and the Ecological Reserve Warden for Race Rocks.
I'm Jamie Frith. I'm the videographer, photographer, and editor for this project that we're doing.
And I'd like to acknowledge that it was filmed entirely on the traditional and ancestral lands of many different Indigenous peoples, including the Cowichan, Songhees, Pachidat, Suk, Nuchatlat, Shanu, and others. And we're extremely grateful to be able to live and work on these lands.
And this project was started out really on the urging of Jamie to do something that could help us celebrate the 50th anniversary of ecological reserves in British Columbia.
So in this project, we lined up 6 different ecological reserves all around Vancouver Island and got to interview the wardens that look after each one and learn about all the special things that go on in each reserve.
And unfortunately, not all reserves in the province have ecological reserve wardens. And we would hope that this video might encourage some of the younger folks out there who are interested in getting out in nature and see things as they happen through the seasons and be able to report on how things are changing in the reserve. Today we're sitting in the Nimpkish River Ecological Reserve, and we're surrounded by an amazing forest of tall, old-growth trees, Douglas fir especially, cedar, Sitka spruce, and all of these have been here for several hundred years since the last fire through this area, pre-settlement times.
Yeah, so in this reserve in particular, I've used my drone to actually measure these huge trees all around us. And my drone uses GPS to plot its location both horizontally but also vertically, quite accurately. So I was able to measure all of these huge Douglas fir trees, and some of them measured up to about 85 meters.
The warden for this reserve for many years was Rolf Kellerholz. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. And it's one of the reserves that would really benefit by having a warden helping to look after it.
So today, this ecological reserve forms a little island of giant old Douglas fir trees surrounded by logging claims on most sides. And to the west, there's a giant area that has been burned down by forest fire. So this is really the last surviving section of huge old growth trees here.
The reserve was created in the 1980s at the urging of Dr. Vladimir Krajina, who was a professor at the University of British Columbia. And it wasn't an easy process that he went through. The logging companies in this area were determined to see the giant logs of this forest cut and then have it just reforested for maximum growth again. Dr. Krajina pointed out that one of the few other areas in the island that had a reserve status was Cathedral Grove. And he pointed out that many of the trees that were there were diseased and really wouldn't last that long, whereas these trees were still healthy and were vigorously growing. The problem with isolating a reserve when you do logging around it is that you create ideal conditions for blowdown. And we've noticed in here today that there are a lot of logs that in the past few years have blown over. Here on the forest floor we can see a number of species that are shade-tolerant plants, like this vanilla leaf. And we also have spots over here of devil's club, and fortunately it's not very thick on the island, so we're able to manage to get through it.
I think all humans have a responsibility to help look after the natural environment, and that responsibility is especially heightened in a place like Vancouver Island, which is so magnificent and unique in many ways. So for me, volunteering as a warden at an ecological reserve seemed like just the perfect way to contribute a bit to stewardship of our province, and in particular this part of Vancouver Island. One of the main purposes of ecological reserves is to create spaces where we can do valuable and long-term research. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any research happening here recently. Originally, this eco-reserve was created not only for the glacier lily, but also for the wide variety of plants. There's cotton grass, heather, blueberries, marigolds, and club moss. And I mean, there's such a variety. I mean, with every step you take, you can see something different. And it would be great to have a really thorough inventory of what is here in terms of plants. And I think over the longer term, there are signs of climate change here. I mean, this year in particular, after the heat wave we just had, I'm seeing a lot of browned plants. I've never seen that up here before, not even when I come up in September. And I do wonder too about the bogs. I mean, this pond is quite large. Other ones are smaller, and some are already dried up right now. I think a longer term study of both the water levels in the ponds and the plants to see if any of them are struggling more or perhaps even disappearing because of climate change would be really useful to do. And to understand the effects of climate change in what's already a tough area. When you think about what these plants have to go through under snow for most of the year, and also there can be really high wind up here. If you add in additional heat and less moisture, which they're obviously quite used to and dependent on, this is an area that could become really challenged. So I think it would be worth studying the biodiversity, the water levels, plant biodiversity, but also the amphibians. I have in the past seen little sacks of frog eggs in the water, and I mean there's tons of different insects right on the surface of the water. So I think that would be a really neat thing to study as well. I have noticed in the past, since last September, that the logging has come up quite close to this ecological reserve. I believe there is a protected area just on the side where the logging is as a result of the Kludak Trail that runs along the edge of the reserve. I'm not sure how big that buffer is, but it's something actually I need to look into and make sure it seems adequate. And then, of course, we have to hope that that buffer gets maintained and respected, because sometimes logging companies do, I think sometimes even accidentally run over these kinds of boundaries. And also, I would not advertise this place. I wouldn't encourage other people to come here, because really the fewer visitors this place gets, the better. And really, when I come up here, it is essentially to make sure that no one else is here. That's kind of my main role in this place. And so the fewer people who come, the better. But I think over time there could be value to some studies happening up here, and that would be a great reason to come up. And for anyone who does visit, of course, if you do it respectfully, do take advantage if you're up in the area to have a quick peek, because it is very special.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Lambert. I'm the volunteer warden for Oak Bay Island's Ecological Reserve. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees First Nations. I became a warden for these islands in 1998. A friend of mine had been the warden beforehand, and I had been out here a few times with him before and just fell in love with these islands. Everything I'm interested in, marine flora and fauna, is found right in this area, and it's about half an hour from my home. One of the issues we've had come up recently is, especially during the time of COVID, that so many people are buying kayaks and paddleboards and they have access to the water. And where these islands had been pretty well protected before from visitors, now they're being visited more heavily. So these islands were set aside to protect the rare ecosystem in the Garry Oak Meadow here. In the coastal prairie, we have some rare plants like the golden paintbrush that grows on Alpha Island and Trial Island, and nowhere else in Canada. And we're just going to do a walk through the meadow here. It's full of chocolate lilies. We found some shooting stars that don't grow in many other places. The particular shooting star that grows here. And we found a lovely little broom rape that parasitizes the lance leaf sedum that grows here as well. The path of the tankers is just on the other side of these islands, and if there was a spill here, it would be catastrophic. Coming onto the beaches and blowing oil up onto the shore here, killing the plants and having a devastating effect on the birds that nest over on the Chain Islands. The geese that are here in the summertime are invasive. They were introduced here many years ago, and they've decided that this is a wonderful place to live. There's lots of food for them to eat. But one of the problems is that they're trampling these flower meadows, the rare meadows that these islands have been set aside as ecological reserves to protect. So the native Canada goose that comes here in the winter flies off to the Arctic to breed. And these ones that were introduced just stay here all year. So we're on Great Chain Island today, and we're standing by the double-crested cormorant nests. Double-crested cormorants started nesting here in 1984, and they nested here till 2007, and there hasn't been a cormorant reared off this island since then. One of the problems with this island is that there's several eagles nesting in the area. There's one at the golf course. There are a couple behind us at Chatham and Discovery here. And the eagles love to sit at the highest point on the island, which unfortunately are these cormorant nests. And I believe this part of the skeleton was the result of a meal from a bald eagle. So the highest number of nests was in 1987, 686 nests, I believe. And since that time, they just gradually declined. But the nests are incredible. Each year, the cormorants would bring in sticks, and they're all decorated with plastics that they've found. Ecological reserves were set aside to preserve rare species, rare ecosystems, and also provide an area for long-term monitoring. So we get an idea of what these islands, in this case, in the islands here, how they will be affected by climate change going forward.
Aikwanat. Aikwana Tzuhalem Namna. I am a beginning Hall Communion speaker. My name is Genevieve Singleton, and this is my husband Dave Holster. We're the wardens here. And what I just said there in Hall Communion, the first language on the lands that I am blessed to walk in and work in, is good afternoon. And it is so nice to see all of you, wherever you are watching this. My friend Philomena Williams, a Cowichan Tribe elder, and my friend Tim Kolchewski, Cowichan Tribe's biologist, often talk to me about the precious ecosystem that we are in. Part of these lands up here on Mount Tzuhalem are Cowichan Tribe lands, and we are blessed to have one area that we're standing in, and they share with us some of the old stories that are becoming forgotten and lost. So we are very, very appreciative of that. So this is a very, very rare ecosystem that we're in today. This is a shallow soiled Gary Oak ecosystem. Shallowed soil, obviously referring to thin soiled. Many of the Gary Oak meadows in lower altitudes are thickly soiled. This is a thin soiled one. Less than 5% of these rare ecosystems are left, and that was a number put out a good 10 years ago. So no doubt it's left. It's much less. Where Gary Oak ecosystems are is very, very attractive for people to live. Fortunately, this being up a mountain on a rocky edge has not been built upon, but certainly on the edges of the boundary this was. And so if this hadn't been turned into some sort of protected area, there would be a lot more activity in it. So Gary Oak ecosystems are only found along the western coast of northwards of California up to here. They are a great interest because with climate change, it is expected that Gary Oak ecosystems will have a rebound because they do like to be in dry, warmer climates. This ecosystem, particularly here, is phenomenal for a very wide range of flowers, some of them quite rare, and also some butterflies. Also, this was one of the last places where the western bluebird was seen breeding some 25 years ago. And we are very active in this reserve of putting up boxes and trying to bring back the western bluebird to this site and also down below in the other Gary Oak meadows below.
Well, the shooting star is probably the most common flower out right now. The chocolate lilies and the fritillaria are also common, and things like the buttercups and stuff like that are fairly common as well.
We also have sea blush and blue-eyed Mary, nice bunches. We also have the balsam root, and it is very rare here on Vancouver Island, and a very special plant. We were very close friends with Sid Watts, and Sid and his wife Emily were the people who brought it to the attention of North Cowichan, and that later moved on to the provincial government to turn this incredible area to an ecological reserve. And with Sid's passing, very sadly, we became wardens officially, and that would be about 5 years ago. So,
yeah, and getting rid of the Scotch broom that was just covering this area up over your head, and we actually spent quite a bit of time getting rid of Scotch broom.
right. And I just want to talk a little bit about what an ecological reserve is and what my particular meaning of it is that it's an area set aside to protect a particular species or ecosystem at risk. And the best thing we can do here is not to come here at all. But being a flower lover myself, that would be very difficult not to do. And we really encourage people to come in with their zoom cameras and their binoculars. If you use your binoculars, you can use them for flower viewing, and with your zoom camera.
particular reserve here, the San Juan River Estuary Eco Reserve, is actually in 3 parts. So there's the part number 1 is actually sort of on its own island in the middle of the estuary here. And during king tides, it doesn't exist, it's underwater. And then there's a 3rd reserve that's about 3/4 of a kilometer up the river from where we reside. And it's the one that adjoins the west side of Fairy Lake. And it's not just logging in the upper San Juan Valley, it's the entire San Juan Valley and all the tributaries that's being logged. If you ever see a satellite photo, like a recent one, it's a little disturbing to see just what is logged. I mean, obviously it's all logged, but it seems to be like it's almost like it's all clear cut at the same time. And I think the just the way the river breathes has changed. Yeah, the dynamics of all the animals are quite interesting. And I think we're on the tip of the bird migratory route before they cross the Strait of Juan de Fuca down to head south. And then on the reverse as well, seeing as we're in an estuary. So we get the big bird migrations as well, which is pretty exciting.
It's amazing the diversity of species. The salmon, we see the variety of salmon coming up the San Juan because the river is very clear. And there are probably about 5 or 6 species of bees that I've never encountered before that we see seasonally because we have so many natural flowering plants. These places need to remain intact and people need to understand the importance because everything is connected. If the salmon die off, then the forests die because there's that cycle of life.
Hi, I'm Gary Fletcher. I'm the Ecological Reserve Warden for Race Rocks, ER number 97. We established this reserve in 1980 at the urging of the lighthouse keepers, who thought that there was very interesting life around here, and so right they were. The reserve is located at the eastern entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it benefits from the confluence of fresh water coming from the Fraser River and salt water coming from the open ocean, which leaves a very productive zone. This is like a small mountain in the end of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the nutrients upwell in this area and provide food for organisms that often live much deeper. It also provides a lot of food for the animals, invertebrates and invertebrates, that live on the island. Race Rock's Ecological Reserve is the only reserve with buildings and people living there. In 1997, Lester Pearson College took over the management of the light station, which had been automated by then. The island became a great classroom for biology and marine science studies for the students of Lester Pearson College and for students from visiting schools. As the tides run in and out through this area at sometimes a maximum of 6 knots, they provide all kinds of food for underwater and for the intertidal organisms as well. The swells in the island are quite spectacular at some times, and they provide an area of the shoreline that gooseneck barnacles can survive at a higher level than normal, and also beds of very large Californianus mussels. The marine mammals in this colony are quite unique in that elephant seals first started having pups here in 2009 and have ever since produced several pups. This year, a record of 4 pups survived to maturity. This is the most northern colony for the breeding of elephant seals. Harbor seals also have a sizable breeding colony, producing many pups a year, and the most abundant mammals are the California and Steller sea lions, which can number over 1,000 individuals in the fall. Race Rocks is a bird breeding colony and also a migratory stopover location, both spring and fall. Glaucous-winged gulls, pigeon guillemots, and black oyster catchers regularly nest here. The glaucous-winged gulls that nest at Race Rocks are quite territorial in their behavior, both when they're setting up their nesting sites. The adults try to make sure that they each have an appropriate area, a few square meters for their nest, and they're very aggressive to anyone else who comes in this area. And then when the chicks are born, the chicks also have to stay within their territory. More than a square meter or so, if they get away from that area, they'll simply be torn apart by other adults. And if you think of this, this is an adaptation that had developed for colonial birds. There's only so much space on a small island, and there have to be a method of determining who gets the allocation for that space. The part of this reserve that is one of the most important that most people never see is underwater. And here there's a large range of invertebrates, marine algae, and fish that are quite unique in the area because of the extra nutrients from the upwelling from the surrounding Strait of Juan Ridge. We have been fortunate to have the association with a number of researchers in the past few years, and one example was our students being able to provide specimens for Dr. Anita Brinkman-Voss of the hydroids, and these are the small forms of life of part of the life cycle of jellyfish. And she was able to identify 65 species of hydroids growing on the intertidal and subtidal areas at Race Rocks. In recognition of the past history of indigenous use of the area, in 2001 the Marine Advisory Board sought the help of Tom Charles from the neighboring Shannon Reserve to advise us on an appropriate name for the island. And he came up with the Tzuhalem name of Shwayen, which means a place of fast waters, and that name we gave to the island. So it's now known as the Race Rocks Shwayen Marine Protected Area.